Check one. Check two. Welcome to Mindfulness Off the Cushion. If you're familiar with the challenges of living mindfully and are looking for help in your daily dance with suffering, our goal is to be a resource for you. So let's jump straight in to Mindfulness Off the Cushion, brought to you by the Austin Mindfulness Center. Welcome to Mindfulness Off the Cushion, episode 5. This week, we're going to talk about savoring, a term introduced by Christina last week, and we thought we would take some time to explore the meaning and the importance of this word and what the heck does it have to do with mindfulness and practicing mindfulness. So let's quickly go around the room. I'd like to do something a little different. Don't just introduce yourself, but also tell us, what are you reading right now?
My name is Christina Filburn. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist here in Austin, Texas, also licensed in the state of New York and New Jersey. I am a trauma-focused therapist. And I am currently reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle, which has been recommended to me over and over and over again. And I just honestly have not had the time to break it open, but divine timing has gotten me to open it now. And I think in general, it is incredibly inspiring way to touch upon emotional, spiritual, physical ways to liberate not just women, but people in general, and kind of how to stay wild while we live in a world that tends to keep us very, quote unquote, tamed.
I don't want to follow that. None of my books are that interesting. My name is Patrick Harris. I'm a psychotherapist at AMC and undergraduate professor of psychology at Houston-Tillotson University. I'm kind of in between a few books. There's one on fibromyalgia that I'm reading just because that's kind of up my alley with my mind-body medicine background. I tend to reread the textbooks that I have my students read just so I can ask very specific questions and stump them during class so I can call them out for not reading, because I'm one of those sadistic professors. And I also have I think, we all have that comfort TV show or movie that we always have on in the background. I have the book equivalent of that called Hector and the Search for Happiness by, I believe, Francois Lallard. It's my go-to. It's about this burnt out psychiatrist who gets burnt out with the monotony of counseling and then goes on this eat, pray, love adventure around the world. And for some reason, just it's written from a Buddhist perspective, and he keeps this little journal with them, and he writes about what makes people happy with each experience. It'll be happiness. The key to happiness is not avoiding unhappiness, or the key to happiness is such and such. So I've revisited that book too, because I've been burnt out lately.
Well, my name is Claudia Barrientos. As you may know, I am a mindfulness instructor, and I'm also a graduate student at UTSA, University of Texas, San Antonio. And I decided to pick up a different kind of book. I've never read this type of book, which is a book about psychotherapists, and it's written from the perspective of a psychotherapist. I guess her name is Lori Gottlieb, and it's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. My professor of children and families recommended it to me. This is a professor that I highly respect, and I got to meet with him and have some coffee with him, and he's got a lot of wisdom, and he thought that I would enjoy this book. So,
can you hold up that book again? I want to see the cover.
From New York Times bestselling author, psychotherapist, and national advice columnist, a hilarious, thought-provoking, and surprising new book that takes us behind the scenes of a therapist's world, where her patients are looking for answers, and so is she.
Okay, so Freud had this concept of our kind of underlying unconsciouses, and that's where we developed the ink blot test of projective tests, right? So when you held that up, this probably says a lot about me. I saw a shot glass of tequila next to the tissue box, but now upon closer inspection, I'm guessing it's a glass of water?
It is a glass of water.
Okay,
yes.
See, that's where my mind is right now.
There are no training. There's no rim of salt and no lime right by it. So.
You passed the Roshar.
Barely.
I was going to say, Lori Gottlieb, I follow her podcast. Cool. It's called Dear Therapists. So that's also a really awesome podcast. As soon as you said that name, I was like, wait a second, I know her.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Well, we'll start putting show notes, links in the show notes for each episode. We haven't really been doing that historically, but now that we're starting to share resources, then I think it's probably about time. I also have a book that I'm reading this week. I cheated a little bit because I wanted this book to help me prepare for this week. We knew going into this that we were going to talk about savoring. And so I went out and got Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hansen. It's a 2013 book, and it's all about the science of treasuring moments or savoring moments, enhancing those moments, and sort of storing those moments away in the treasure chest of your heart, with this idea that over time it essentially sort of becomes part of who you are. But let's go ahead and jump right in. Christina, I'd like for you to get us started, because this whole episode is essentially being defined by the fact that you mentioned savoring last week. I'd love to ask how it relates to mindfulness.
Absolutely. Thank you. So when it comes to savoring, it's been a term that I've probably came to my attention in 2008, 2009, when I was myself practicing the art of savoring. And since then, professionally, I've learned that I've come up with this metaphor that it's like the umami of mindfulness, that there are so many different flavors and experiences you can have with the experience of savoring. And before we kind of get into those details, more simply put, savoring is this capacity to be in the moment, to be able to experience what we are experiencing, to the attention to the moment, to appreciating the moment, to be able to enhance parts of the moment. I think it's part of, the old adage of stop and smell the roses. That's a good example of what savoring would be like. And I think modern day times, when it comes to psychotherapy and my personal experiences, it's a time to take a break and be mindful of a time when we are possibly, our sympathetic nervous system is reacting, and we feel maybe a little hypervigilant, or we feel uneasy. And savoring is a really nice way to bring some balanced view to the experience in which we're in. So it can be very cathartic and therapeutic.
This is what popped up for me while you were talking. Do you feel that savoring is like a choice? Like, is it a learned behavior? Is it something that we gravitate towards when we're savoring the good, but not savoring the bad? Or we have like some threshold for this is worth savoring versus this is not worth savoring?
Good question. I honestly find it to be more of an objective term, not so positive or negative, but just objective, kind of like the excitatory response. We assume exciting is always positive, but it's also not always so positive in our actual reality. So I believe that in some ways we can savor things that are not as quote unquote positive. But I do think that it's like another muscle in our brain that we kind of have to practice, right? Like with habits, what is it? The 66 days of doing a habit for it to be actually formulated. So I think once we start practicing savoring, it can come to our availability and implement it at times when we need it. And then I think sometimes we can do it automatically once we kind of learn how to tune into that.
There's just like so much to unpack with this topic. I like so many like ideas swirling in my head. I'm trying to think of like what's the best response, but I'll just rip off the Band-Aid with like the negative before the positive, because it's really easy, or it's easier to talk about ways to savor the positive. Like, I'm going to savor this really good meal. I'm going to savor this moment with friends. I remember when my stepdad was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I'm going to savor this remaining time we have together because there is now a clock that has been started. But with the negative, it's not like savoring in a sense of like self-flagellation or punishment, or like you need to sit with the consequences of your actions. Like, it's not that in that sense, but some people do that, right? Like people with depression or trauma histories, they have this need to kind of like punish themselves for something that if it happened, then I need to really make myself suffer for that. But when I think of it in terms of savoring the experience to better understand a response to it or a sense of control. Like, there was this study done by, I need to go back and look it up, but when they were measuring the trauma responses of children to 9/11, like kids that were directly there, that directly witnessed it, because we know that kids are really resilient, but they found that kids that had a better understanding of their sense of control or autonomy or how to respond, or agency, that's the word I'm looking for, sense of agency to how to respond to that situation, the better they fared and the less that they were less likely to develop PTSD down the road. So they measured this by, they would ask kids about that experience. So in a sense, like, you have to save that, because it's intuitive that when something bad happens to us, what do we want to do? Ooh, let's just forget it. Let's not talk about it. Let's go out and get a drink and just get our minds off it. Let's distract. But with these kids, they were asking them to go back to that day and draw a picture of that day. And so the kids that had solutions, like their superhero was there helping people out of the building. One kid drew a trampoline because they witnessed people falling to the ground. And so they drew a trampoline because this time they're recreating that memory with a sense of agency that they contributed to a solution. So when we look at savoring the negative, it's sitting with the discomfort, not avoiding it, and realizing that just because it was an uncomfortable experience doesn't mean we were a victim to that situation. Like, we still have agency, we still have autonomy. And the more that we can wrap our heads around that response to an uncomfortable situation, the better that we're going to be.
Yeah.
That's deep. That's a lot of stuff right there. Let me just say, first of all, that we're going to trademark something here that Christina said. Savoring is the umami of mindfulness. And that doesn't need to be trademarked. I don't know what is, because that is a beautiful, beautiful statement. I absolutely love that. Savoring is there's definitely a volition, an intentionality of exploring what it means to experience the present. That's how I tend to orient myself around this term of savoring. Within the context of the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which I've taught, and one of the rich weeks was the week where we explore mindful eating. And I think that this is a wonderful place to explore this concept of savoring. And what we practice in the experience of mindful eating is the moment-by-moment experience of what it means to nourish ourselves, to feed ourselves, to taste a piece of chocolate or whatever. And I've done this in all different kinds of environments, with children, with adults, and there's always seems to be a similar response, a universal response, which is that the moment that I bring greater awareness to this present experience of tasting, smelling, of touching, the sense of touch, of sound, that they tend to appreciate the piece of chocolate more. And the invitation that I offer to the students is that the secret sauce, the special quality of mind that you brought to this moment was just simple, bare awareness. And I love what you said about, Christine, about it's more neutral. It's not about just savoring the positive, savoring the negative. It's the bare awareness. And once you bring that sense of bare awareness to this experience of tasting this piece of chocolate, you tend to taste the nuance of the chocolate a lot more rich, vividly, and special. That in of itself is a metaphor for life. I think that the moment that we can slow down and bring intentional awareness to this experience of being alive, no matter whether the experience is pleasant, neutral, or negative, that we can understand the nuance of the moment with greater depth, clarity, and wisdom.
Absolutely. The derivatives of the first time I heard this concept was by Bryant and Veroff in 2007, right? And even in describing that, encompassing all the things that we're talking about, all of the different modes or angles we can see as this concept, right? And it's kind of like when we're talking about different languages, there's a word, but it has so much deeply enriched experiences in the word. We're almost like savoring the word savor. But the three main types of savoring, right, is savoring of the past, reminiscence, right? Remembering funny moments or positive moments of the past. We're also savoring the present or savoring the moment, right? For instance, as you're saying, kind of enjoying whatever's in front of you, the meal or the glass of water, or paying attention to your sensory experience at the time. And then also the savoring of the future, right? Also referred to as anticipation. And that's kind of visualizing something of the future that will bring us a savory experience, like a pleasant meal I'll be cooking for dinner, or maybe even the next time I get to see y'all, whether it's at a party or even planning a vacation. So those are the kind of three clearly written modes of savoring that can be expanded upon. But I think it's really all encompassing and kind of trying to drive the concept home.
I just heard you invite us on vacation. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. I'm going to Cabo at the end of October. If you guys want to savor that moment with me.
But savoring is cool. I like what Claudia said about it shows that it enhances the experience. It makes the chocolate taste better. And that's kind of goes back to, that Hardwired book that Lance is reading is just based on positive psychology, right? The work of Martin Seligman from back in the day of the more that we open ourselves up to positive experiences and we look for positive in the world, the more that we'll see it. Kind of like that saying that when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if we are able to stretch these positive moments into a little bit longer and a little bit longer, our amygdala is more likely to store them under, oh, this was good, let's do this again. This was good, let's look for this again. Because we know through work on trauma and Krista Neff's work on how our brains kind of gravitate towards negativity, which is why she wrote the book on self-compassion, is because it's that survival instinct to look for the negative, to anticipate the negative. And if you don't fight that instinct, because, we've evolved, we've been around for thousands of years, we don't need to run away from animals that are going to kill us in the night, that if we can move past this instinct to only look for the negative, we will be so much more happier. In fact, if we take that a step further and open ourselves up to the positive and savor the positives more, then we're more likely to look for the positives. And that's why you get people that wear rose-colored glasses every day. Like they will not have a bad day because they've kind of passed this threshold. They're into this like happiness nirvana because they've mastered the art of looking for the positive and reframing the negatives. And a lot of that does come with that sense of like, let me sit with this. Let me really make a relationship, a connection with this experience. Because the longer that it's in our working memory and the deeper connection that we make with it, as cognitive psychology teaches us, the more likely we're to store it in our long-term memory versus you might have gone to your favorite restaurant, scarfed it down, and then you moved on 20 minutes later. That's not going to stick around as much as having a good sit-down meal over good conversation with good company. You're going to remember every little detail.
Which brings up a really good talking point in regards to like some potential benefits, right? According to like positive psychology around how it yields or ends up yielding sort of cognitive resilience or experiential resilience, as well as kind of expanding upon our idea of gratitude and both the negative and the positive, or even just more neutrally objective. Just being able to kind of sit in those moments is, I think, brings upon a large amount of resilience, whether it be both positive or negative.
Mm. And I love how both of you are using this term of sitting with the moment. There's a reason why you are using that word. I think that it's a profound capacity that we have, and yet something that we tend not to do. I think that the opposite of savoring the moment is not sitting with the moment, right? Is pushing it away or clinging to it desperately. This capacity that we have to sit with the moment allows us to, again, gain more insight into the very nature of what that moment is. And once we can begin to sit with that moment and gain insight into the nature of that moment, we can begin to see that that moment can be reframed in many ways, even within the context of savoring a bad experience. If you expand that and reframe that, you can savor the moment of resilience that comes after experiencing that bad moment. This capacity that we have to say, you know what, I am experiencing this very difficult time, but yet I am able to be strong and firm and ground myself, and I'm not going to lose myself in the moment. And that in of itself is an act of resilience, and you can savor that resilience.
Right on. I think, how I would say explain it too is when I'm savoring, or you're truly expanding your experience, right? And I think that draws upon resilience at tremendous amounts. Just for a personal experience this last weekend, I went camping, just me and my dog, and got to savor a lot of the experience. And honestly, I've never done a trip like that before. And it really helped me to intentionally savor experiences, but also in my own thoughts about my experiences, getting to complete thoughts that I felt like I have not completed in like 35 years of my life. have been like savoring all of the parts of me that are sometimes yucky and sometimes not so yucky. But overall, I lived alive to hear, to talk about it. So,
Okay. I have to do this. I promised myself, and in fact, I somewhat promised my co-hosts in our pre-call that I would stop splitting hairs, and yet here I go. So you're suggesting that you had some ability over the weekend to have some complete thoughts, and then Claudio is talking about sitting and savoring a moment. At what point are you just lost in thought or clinging to a thought or reliving past experiences and not really sitting and being in the present moment? I know it's splitting hairs, but I own it. Let's see if we can go there.
Oh, sure. It's complicated. And I don't know, I can tell you just from my own experience, it won't be generally speaking like this, but I was doing sensory type of things that were also involving me in the moment, right? So at the same time, while I was kind of thinking about these experiences, I was also petting my dog. I was also viewing a campfire in front of me. I also was at a lake and being able to connect with the lake, as well as bird watching, and everything that was involved in that present moment without having to compartmentalize doing one or the other, which I often can get distracted and do. And so the act of being alone kind of helped me expand and savor both simultaneously without being worried about one over the other.
Mm-hmm. Or worried that you're not doing it right. You got to be doing either this or that.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
I know, yeah.
So in this case, I use sort of the tactile sensation or even just my other parts of my sensation, being intentional about it. While I even lit some incense, that to remind me of like where I was. I picked a very specific incense that I've never burned before. And I chose to do that just to kind of associate it with exactly where I was and how I was processing those ideas.
Why do you keep using air quotes when you say incense? I don't understand.
It was really incense.
I was, not to go off on a tangent, I was re-listening to these episodes and I realized that I'll tell a joke and then everybody either steps away to laugh or you just smile on camera, which I could see. But then I'm like, oh, that joke bombed because no one's laughing. So now I feel like all of our listeners are like, well, Patrick's just super socially awkward. But I'm glad we're finally laughing. Good job.
It took me like 5 seconds to process that joke. So, but I got there. Can
we all savor how hilarious I am? Let's just take a moment to savor my humility and sense of humor.
Well, I wasn't going to expand upon it because I didn't want to get distracted, but I did have incense sticks and I had Palo Santo and I had a little bit more of, that's why I was kind of quoting it as incense because some people may not find Palo Santo to be like incense, but if you wanted the long dragged out version, that's what it was.
You got it.
I still savor you though.
Thank you. I love Palo Santo, but actually, I said that in jest with no intention behind it other than to make people giggle, but that's a good point, right? Like, why do people use substances? I think, there's no, I feel like it's not a coincidence that we're seeing a resurgence with these psychedelics, like ketamine's coming back, acid's coming back, things that we like equate to like, ooh, that's what my parents did in like the 60s and the 70s. Mm-hmm. And marijuana is still obviously prominent. Now it's getting legalized and higher social tolerance. But how much of that do y'all feel is just a catalyst to savor? Like our monkey minds are constantly going. We've talked in depth in past episodes about this capitalist society and this production driven society and this side hustle mentality. I wonder how many people aren't necessarily recreational drug users for the sense of like, I just like to get high and zone out, but to quiet that part of their mind. Because when I've worked with severely mentally health populations, I'm sure Christina's had this experience too. A lot of that illicit drug use is self-medicating to quiet their mind, either from hallucinations or psychosis or irritability or whatever's going on. So I'm wondering how many people are actually using stuff like DMT and mushrooms to be able to quiet the active part of their mind to better savor the moment.
I remember in my college years, Carlos Castaneda and the way of Don Juan, The Way of the Yaqui. I think it was called. Carlos Castaneda was the writer behind that. And he goes into northern Mexico, right in the border with Texas, and he meets up with a Yaqui Indian. And the Yaqui Indian introduces him to the use of psilocybin as a spiritual means to explore reality. And within that context, I was always very curious about that. And it seems like I've also been reading and watching a lot of interesting documentaries about the use of psilocybin for the treatment of depression. And you hear the testament of these individuals that are doing this in a very controlled environment with a very trained individual, which are doing micro doses of psilocybin in pill form. And it is unbelievable to hear the testament of these individuals. And again, the spirit of the testament is always about letting go. I think Patrick is kind of orienting himself towards this, like letting go of that habitual way of relating to myself, letting go of that monkey mind, that mind of narrative self-referential storytelling, and moving into something deeper. I would go as far as to say that is a form of savoring what it means to be human. Savoring is so expansive and so multidimensional that through the use of controlled substances, we can tap into that. There is a thirst, a desire from individuals to explore this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we can have a whole different podcast episode, right, on these types of other like treatments too. But I agree.
Mm-hmm. I want to share with you what because I asked my mentor. I guess this is somebody that I've known for 35 years, and he's the one that taught me about mindfulness. Back in 1999, I took the very first course in mindfulness with him, as he was the instructor, and I asked him what savoring meant to him. He's 78 years old, 79 years old, and he buys one of those Starbucks Frappuccinos that they sell at all the supermarkets. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking he's drinking this and savoring it, right? And he's like, I drink it, but I drink one sip, a big sip a day. And it lasts him about 5-6 days to drink one bottle. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And he finds such a rich experience in knowing that at the end of the day, he always drinks it around the same time. It's his little evening treat. He's looking out for his cholesterol and his blood sugar and all that. He's a healthy guy, but he wants to always be very attentive to that. So for him, this is like the ultimate treat. And he says that each sip is really, really special to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to add to that because what that brought for me, if we're talking about sort of like personal or collective experiences, is we can really bring up the idea of fasting, and how that kind of plays into savoring. I know as a Reformed Jew, I tend to, during certain holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, fast. And the biggest piece of that from a spiritual mindfulness perspective is the savoring aspects of what it's like when you do have that, when you break the fast, and then expanding that to absolutely everybody in very non-religious ways. When we first eat our first meal of the day with the breakfast, the break the fast, and how we can sort of savor and appreciate just our first morning thing, whatever that thing may be, whether it's food or petting our animals, etc. So sometimes that transition from like a non-savory time to a savory time is, I think, as well as the experiences I live for personally, the disparity between the two.
That's such a great point, because you see that throughout not only the Abrahamic religions, but you see it even like in Eastern religions. Most, if not all, arguably, religions have some sort of like fasting ritual or discipline built in, whether it's around specific times or around the year. Yeah. And it's not for like punishment or restricting. It's literally to take the time to reflect and call to mind, how good you have it. Like make the sacrifice for your deity or belief to remind yourself like how much blessings you have in your life. That's interesting. I never equated that to the savoring conversation, but yeah, that was 100% accurate. I feel like a lot of people forget that. Like growing up Catholic, like people just complain about Lent, like they forget, or it's just weird, the competition thing of like, ooh, I've abstained from giving up sodas or whatever. And instead of like, I don't like this, that this is uncomfortable, but that's the point. Like I am uncomfortable because I've attached myself too much to this.
Right. And then even if you want to make it a little more secular, right? Even when we think about the United States of just Thanksgiving, right? When we talk about savoring Thanksgiving comes up a lot, and how if people celebrate like a traditional type of Thanksgiving, how savored that meal is. Some people will even not eat all day to be able to savor that meal, or they want to savor it so much that they eat it for days after. And so I feel like there's a lot that can be shared in one way or another. I think we're saying that everyone savors in some way, whether we're mindful of it or not. But I think that life becomes a lot more enjoyable once we start capitalizing on those moments just to kind of be in it.
This podcast is sponsored by the Austin Mindfulness Center, the premier mental health counseling center in Texas for mindfulness-based therapy, education, and coaching. If you're an individual or couple struggling with stress, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, or you're just looking to better equip yourself to gracefully navigate these turbulent times, you can visit us online at austinmindfulness.org and request an appointment today. Now let's get back to our podcast.
I absolutely love what Christina said about this notion of savoring within the spiritual practice. And it definitely resonates with me. It feels like through this act of fasting, we can savor the freedom that comes from not feeling so attached, right? Not feeling so attached to either feeding ourselves endlessly or wanting or craving. And that's that freedom that comes, that sense of freedom, it is profound. Once we can taste a little bit of that freedom, it's hard for it to go away. Meaning that I think we find that it's worth cultivating. I think it's a wholesome quality that we want to continue practicing. So I love that.
Let's switch gears and get into the how-to. I know we have therapists here or clinicians, you might say, a mindfulness instructor. Please feel free to answer this question however you like, whether you're talking about maybe some of your own practices, how you savor, if you want to share an experience, or potentially even how you instruct or mentor others to remind them to savor throughout the week.
During this time, I ask for someone to choose something that they really enjoy or that they just want to draw more attention and expansion to within their experiential life, and figure out a way to savor that a bit more. Whether that's, and they get to choose, they have that autonomy and agency of figuring out, would it be around the timing of it? Would it be around the expansion of it? Would it be around, so they can be creative in that way. And then another piece I think that is sort of essential is just kind of stopping and slowing down. It's obviously we are all kind of stuck under this construct of time, but even taking a bit more time to savor that piece of fruit, or as Claudio was saying, that frappuccino, of seeing the other parts of the experience, which means instead of kind of grabbing that mug and just sucking it down, giving a second to take a look at the straw and seeing and being grateful about how this substance is going to get from the cup into your mouth, into your body, and the profoundness of those experiences. Even, the basic savoring exercises is, I want to say, like, mindfully making love to that experience. So whether it's a strawberry, looking at all the seeds, really appreciating the seeds, maybe taking a little bite of it and seeing how you bite before you pop the whole strawberry in, or you drink the whole frappuccino. So you can kind of slow down the experience, or even expand upon like the fragments of that experience in order to create happiness.
Ooh.
My hippie response.
It's funny that we're all like, I like what you said about this. I like what you said about that. It'd be funny if just one day it was like, I hate that. That's just, I don't agree with that at all.
Boo. Throwing tomatoes at the screen.
I always just tie it back to intention. I feel like a lot of stuff just boils down to intention, how we conduct ourselves and how we savor and how we judge and experience all really goes back to intention. Like when clients want to get out more or get out of their comfort zone more or socialize more, like we set a specific intention. Because is it to just get out of the house? Because that's one thing. Is it to get out of the house and enjoy the situation? Then that's another thing. Because if it's just to get out and do one new thing out of your comfort zone, that's an objective measure of you accomplish or you did not accomplish. If you got out of your comfort zone and it just didn't work out, like you thought you would want to go see a Formula One race and you realize, oh, I don't actually like Formula One. Your efforts were not a failure. Like they were not lost on that because you still succeeded in your intention, but the experience wasn't that great. And you just take that experience and you learn from it. So from next time, don't go to a Formula One race, go to something else. So I always start the conversation of intention. Like, is your intention to enjoy this meal out with friends? Or is the intention to enjoy the time out with friends or the conversation? Or is it just to get out of the house? Because that's going to determine what you savor, where your focus is on. Like what Lance was asking about Christina, like, is that striving or grasping, or, what's the difference between savoring the thoughts and just letting your thoughts cut loose and take you wherever you go is the intention. So is the intention to do this, then that's what we'll focus on.
It's possible that the word intention has been used in every episode thus far of our podcast. I wonder we could create a little word cloud to see how often we've used different words. But I know, in fact, intention continues to come up. And I think it really, truly is at the heart of mindfulness in many ways.
Because it changes our approach to psychology, which historically has been, how do we think, feel, and behave based on the environment influencing us? And just recently, in terms of just like the broad scope of the timeline of psychology and how long we've been studying it, has like cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology and the sense of like individuality and autonomy really been thrown into the mix. Because when we look at psychodynamic, the perspective is I am who I am based on past experiences. So I'm basically a victim to circumstance, which is why I am. And then we had behaviorism come on and be like, that's not scientific. You're just making crap up. Let's actually study stuff. So they observed the outside, the external world. And then they determined, like some behaviorists, purists back in the day said, we're just mindless robots. We are conditioned to like what we like, be afraid of what we're afraid of. So none of that has room for intention. Like none of that has room for intention in the conversation. But now that we're at this point where we understand, like, ooh, we're not just mindless dummies. We actually think for ourselves. Like if I like a chocolate bar, it's because I like a chocolate bar. There's something about it I like that it creates in me, not because I was conditioned by some early childhood experience that I had a chocolate bar on the best Christmas ever. And now I've paired those two and they were reinforced or whatever. So yeah, it's not surprising. I'm sure we'll drop the intention bomb in every single episode.
This has been a good talk. I hope that the listeners out there can really begin to explore what it means to savor and what it means to savor the present. And I guess for me, that's what I keep coming back to is intentionally savoring the present and what that means. And the beautiful thing about the present is that it's always here, right? So that means that there is an endless opportunity to drop into the present and connect with it in a more meaningful way. Savor the present. What that means to me is I savor the impermanence of this present. I savor that this moment, it's fleeting, and no matter whether it's good, bad, or neutral, it's fleeting. And there is something really empowering about understanding that. I think about when I speak to my parents. I speak to my parents on WhatsApp. They're in Spain. So I speak to them almost every day. And there's moments in the conversations with my mother, let's say, where I tend to not be present. And what enables me to come back to the present and connect with her is to contemplate for a moment that there will be a day where my mother will not be on this phone call with me. And that right there slaps me into the present. So I think that the intention there is I want to be present with my mom in this conversation with her.
What I'm also hearing, it's interesting. We keep going back to intention, but I'm also hearing this other element, which I will put the word skill to. And in fact, in Rick Hanson's book, Hardwiring Happiness, he says that very thing. With a little intention and skill, we can take some seconds here and there each day and weave a handful of these moments, almost like jewels, right, into the fabric of our brain, our being, and into our lives. And that's a very beautiful thing. So we do keep coming back to intention, but I think the reason we're focusing on how to, and the reason we have this podcast, is because we recognize that there is another element, and that is the skill element. Yeah. Anyone disagree?
Well, with that, I actually just wanted to share some gratitude, right? About, as we're talking about this, kind of like the privilege of a neurotypical individual with access to education and access to all these resources we have in order for us to be having this conversation around savoring. It's a tough concept that, as you are right, when we have to be in a privileged situation to feel safe enough to kind of do this higher level thinking of, the transcendental thinking, or the idea of like self-actualization. We've all had to put that a bit on pause these days. Yeah, just kind of, I guess my only part of it is I do not disagree, but I also wanted to give gratitude towards the privilege of being able to savor these conversations and savor the time and energy we have to be able to chat and expand and share these expansions with individuals and ourselves.
Hear. Yep.
I want to savor that Lance finally quoted somebody that wasn't John Kabat-Zinn. So let's take the time to. It took 4 or 5 episodes, but we got there.
Do you know how much intention it took to make that happen? A lot.
It took beautiful practice.
That's beautiful. The skill is what the skills, plural. I think that's all that we're trying to teach people or impart people or share with people, is those skills. I think the skills of Patrick and Christina and you and me, I want to believe that there's something really valuable there, and that we're just trying to share that.
So I know we're wrapping up, but I want to throw just one last curveball in there of, so, circling back to the off the cushion, what does that look like in this overstimulated world? Like if we just literally, you can't squeeze blood from a rock, you can't pour from an empty cup. So how can we savor more without taking more off our plate if that's just not an option right now?
I think it has a lot more to do, for me anyway, it's kind of like this assessment and a compassionate assessment of how I use my time and my energy. So if I'm spending 10 more minutes doing something that I'm like, actually not really enjoying this, then that's a couple of minutes I can help delegate. Again, using the construct of time and units of time, minutes, to be able to delegate towards the next day when I'm catching myself doing this, saying, I could be savoring these couple minutes with anything that I'm doing, whether it's sitting outside with my dog, whether it's having my cup of coffee. So it's not adding more time to the day, but it's kind of transforming the time and energy we do use to do things that tend to be more enjoyable, that we find to be a more balanced way of living our lives. I don't know if that sounds idealistic, but that's realistically what I do.
Something really small that I do, and I'm confident that you guys do it as well. But for me, I recognize that when I have 2 or 3 minutes, my mind and therefore my eyes will immediately go to my phone, and then often my hands will follow, and boom, you name the activity, whatever that digital experience is, I'm doing it because I got 90 seconds. And since I have learned mindfulness and have become a practitioner, a daily practitioner, I now, with intention and with practice and perhaps skill, I then make the choice to just close my eyes and savor the moment, be in the moment, and take 2 minutes for myself. I'm not necessarily consciously making time on my calendar, but I am in that moment responding to the fact that I have 90 seconds, and with skill, responding in a way that I think is best for me and my mental health.
Mm.
Lance caught me savoring last week at the office when I had a couple minutes on hand, and I decided, he planted a lovely landscaping out there. And I was like, I'm going to savor this beautiful weather and this outside air and savor that I'm not stuck in my home like a lot of people have been during the pandemic. And yeah, so kind of just taking the moment. And although you're right, Lance, that you feel the urge or the sort of impulse sometimes to like grab my phone to be like, I have time to be on my phone right now. And so maybe another topic offshoot of this is knowing or feeling, getting to know that you're worthy of transforming this time into time that is worth savoring. I think is a big piece. Just feeling and knowing that you are worth it to use this time. If you like to be on your phone for 90 seconds, go for it. If that's a savory activity, if it's something else that you'd like to do, sort of no judgment in it, then you're worthy of that too. So your time and energy is something that you savor and how to act upon it.
That's a good point. I think we judge ourselves of what's worthy of our time or not. Like there's this stigma of like, oh, you only watch movies, you don't read books. It's like, I'm still learning crap. Like I'm watching somebody tell a story that's unfolding in front of me. But when we're looking at like how to constructively use our time, I was having this conversation with a client recently of there's this like impulse to do more. Like I have to be constructive with my time. It's like, you're working like 65-hour weeks. I feel like the most constructive thing would be to do nothing, like just sit there and do nothing. It probably goes against like what we feel like is a productive use of our time, but we also have to recognize that we are mortal beings that need rest and that need less stimulation sometimes.
What's that famous mindfulness expression? Don't just sit there, do something. No, don't just do something, sit there. Right?
That's beautiful.
I think these are my last words. So say there's always opportunity to savor. With the good, you savor the joy. With the bad, you savor resilience. When you complete something, you savor the reward for completing that something. When you're with others, you savor the companionship. When you're alone, you savor the space.
Yeah. There's a proverb that I don't believe I'd ever heard of before, and it's in the book that I'm currently reading. I did some Googling, and it's a little bit ambiguous as to who the original author is. So for now, I'm just going to say a proverb. You're welcome to look it up online. And it is something to the effect of, if you take care of the minutes, or if you take care of the moments, the years will take care of themselves.
Mm.
Anyone else have a nugget of wisdom as we wrap up this week?
Yeah, just to echo what we've been saying, just savoring our existence and the yin and the yang of our lives. We can savor both the successes, we can savor the perceived failures. I think the act of savoring is just something that most people have access to, and some people have access to expanding. And so kind of just embracing and accepting all parts of what we are able to savor and what we do what we choose when we choose to savor these things.
I like that proverb. I feel like that's going to be my mantra for this week. I had a professor tell me something similar when I was considering going back for a PhD, which is, don't focus on the end goal. Don't focus on that piece of paper at the end. Focus on the here and the now. Like each class, each assignment, benefit from it, follow through on it, and then grow. Because if you do that, everything else will fall in its place. And that's so true. Like we tell ourselves, survive this week, survive this, just get past this. When if we just focus on what's now, everything else will fall into place. So yeah, I'm gonna sit on that one. But even that's another perfect example. That's such a great nugget in a hour of conversation. And it's hard to, I feel like there's been dozens of good nuggets sprinkled throughout this episode. And like, there's just not a lot of time because conversation is so like rapid, right? Like we see something on television, we're like, ooh, I should remember that. But do we actually write it down? Like that's, I forgot one of y'all were talking about like just finding the moments to savor more. Like if you want to remember, interact with it more. Like keep a journal, keep a gratitude journal, keep a running journal of things that just bring you joy and quotes and nuggets of wisdom like that. So you can actually savor that information and not just be like, ooh, that was a good one. Okay, I'll forget it tomorrow.
Thank you all for your time. As I say every week, I really do appreciate it. I know you guys are super busy. Let's do this. Let's plan to next week talk a little bit more about gratitude and this idea of journaling and why that is so important and how it can be a positive impact in our lives. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next week. This has been one of my favorite episodes so far. It was a great discussion, and I hope you enjoyed listening. The act of savoring is something we can all do here and there throughout our day. Our hope for you this week is that you'll remember the importance of slowing down and savoring your moments as much as possible. Join us next week when we explore the power of gratitude. See you soon.